Hello, everyone. Hope you had a happy Thanksgiving, and welcome to NeoUnrealist. Former Navy Secretary Richard Spencer, he's some piece of work, this guy. In the old days, those long ago days, say going back just 3 years, basically before President Trump was elected, when you were revealed to have been canned from the executive branch for insubordination. This was publicly humiliating, and often you'd never hear from these people again for a long period of time. No, not this guy. Spencer, if you can believe it, just days after getting the boot for multiple acts of gross insubordination against not just the President of the United States, but his superior in the chain of command, Defense Secretary Esper, he writes an op-ed in the Washington Post and seems oblivious to the fact that he's exposing himself as a member of the deep state. Now, whenever we hear mention of the deep state, the left likes to call such a notion a conspiracy theory by, engaging in a straw man argument. But of course, there is not some organization calling itself the deep state.
Of course! Of course!
Neither officially nor even on an unofficial basis, where you'd have this government-wide cabal or network that has regular clandestine meetings, with a formulated master plan with timetables and, just organized in that sense.
Discussion! Right? Discussion! Who want to talk about issues, not talk about this?
Well, there may be isolated pockets of such people who behave that way, like the top leadership of the FBI at the close of the Obama administration and the early Trump administration. I doubt that even they, if you'd asked them at the time, if they would even see what they were doing as being in something called the deep state. You see, in their own minds, everyone is the hero of their own movie. People like Comey, Clapper, Strzok, Page, McCabe, they view themselves as patriots who are defending truth, justice, and the American way from the bad orange man. This op-ed by former Navy Secretary Spencer in the WAPO reveals a perfect example of what of this blind spot that they have, the obliviousness to what it is they are actually doing that the typical isolated deep stater has. So this man, he inadvertently confirms everything President Trump says about him and the deep state, that you so loudly and often decries. So let's dive into it. Spencer was asked to resign by Secretary of Defense Esper for his actions regarding the case of Chief Petty Officer Edward Gallagher, a Navy SEAL who he was acquitted of multiple charges by a military court. We won't go into them here because, for all intents and purposes, it's not really important. Basically, Gallagher, he was almost completely cleared of any wrongdoing, all except for the least consequential charge that he faced for posing for a picture with an expired fighter. Now, for this one thing, Gallagher was reduced in rank to Petty Officer First Class and for 4 months confinement, but with credit for time served, basically that was nullified, so it was just a loss of rank, really. At the bottom line, Gallagher, he went through the process, his case was adjudicated, and he got a slap on the wrist with the equivalent of a misdemeanor for this one little thing. On November 1st, reports emerged that members of Gallagher's family made a social media appeal to President Trump for a pardon. And 2 weeks later, on November 15th, President Trump intervened and did in fact pardon Edward Gallagher, meaning effectively that the demotion was reversed, so his rank and pay as a chief petty officer, were restored. And that right there, my friends, that's supposed to have been the end of it. I don't think people realize just how powerful a pardon is. A pardon, to put it mildly, is absolute. In fact, of all the powers that a president of the United States has in the Constitution, it is probably the most absolute power of all. It is, for all intents and purposes, unlimited, cannot be countered, opposed, or overturned by anyone. It is, in the legal sense, as if the thing that is being pardoned just never happened at all. In fact, the only limitation I have ever heard even being debated is if the President of the United States could, in theory, pardon him or herself. And understand, that is thus far just an academic debate, as it's never been done, and it's not clear, even if it were tried, how it would or even could be contested. So once Trump said the proverbial magic words of,
"I pardon you,"
that was supposed to be all she wrote. So here is where former Secretary Spencer begins exposing himself. He writes acknowledging how unusual his actions after that pardon were. It is highly irregular for a secretary to become deeply involved in most personnel matters. Highly irregular, but had that been the extent of what he did, still within the bounds of what's allowed. I mean, just because the secretary usually doesn't get involved with low-level cases, personnel cases, doesn't mean he can't. But he goes on to write how he got involved in order to undermine the express order of the President of the United States. He writes, "Before the trial began in March, I received 2 calls from the President asking me to lift Gallagher's confinement in a Navy brig. I pushed back twice because the presiding judge, acting on information about the accused's conduct, had decided that confinement was important." Hello, Spencer. I mean, this guy admits right there in black and white that he was ignoring the chain of command, direct orders from the president himself to him, because he thought the opinion of some judge was, quote, important. The text of what he wrote there is literally called, or at least they used to call it, insubordination. He had twice inserted himself to undermine the valid and legal order of his ultimate superior in the chain of command, the President of the United States. And understand that no one, and I mean no one, is even claiming that the President's order is somehow invalid or against any law. I mean, he has this power. He exercised it lawfully. Whether or not you agree with the decision he made is moot. All that matters, if you're Secretary of the Navy at that point, is that the order was made, and this person, based on his personal opinion, saw fit to #resist. But he words it ever so more so delicately when he writes that he pushed back twice. Now I'm gonna have to bash President Trump here on this one. He doesn't come away without blame here. Is the president so accustomed to having his subordinates undermine his orders that he doesn't just react to it anymore? I mean, this guy in any other administration would have been fired on the spot. You heard me. This is not a hypothetical situation of what would Obama do. We have an example of what Obama would do that actually happened. So if you're going to have to remember back, this was a while ago in the Obama administration, where former President Obama canned a general for far less than what this guy did. In an article written by Michael Hastings in a July 2010 issue of Rolling Stone magazine, General Stanley McChrystal and his staff mocked Joe Biden, National Security Advisor James Jones, U.S. Ambassador Carl Elkenberry, and Richard Holbrooke. So go read that article, people. It's one of the June issues of Rolling Stone magazine from July 2010. If you do, you're going to see one salient fact that at no point in the article is General McChrystal quoted being directly critical of the president or the policies of the president at the time, Barack Obama. Some of the comments of his staff seem to indicate their own perception that McChrystal found President Obama disappointing the 2 times he'd met with him. So understand something here. McChrystal staffers claim that Hastings exaggerated the seniority of the aides that he was quoting, and that they believed that their interactions with him were off the record. These were private conversations. So essentially saying that Hastings broke their trust. So let's recap. McChrystal himself made no such derogatory comments about the President of the United States or his policies. Some number of low-level staffers made offhand comments about that in their opinion, McChrystal was not impressed with Obama and his policies. McChrystal was put in the position where just the perception that he was in disagreement with his superior in the chain of command, uttered in some off-the-record conversations by subordinates on his staff. On top of that, again, he said nothing himself, just that perception that someone somewhere thought he didn't like Obama's policies He has to then call Vice President Joe Biden to formally apologize, and then later that day, McChrystal has to issue the following public statement. I extend my sincerest apology for this profile. It was a mistake reflecting poor judgment and should never have happened. Throughout my career, I have lived by the principles of personal honor and professional integrity. What is reflected in this article falls far short of that standard. I have enormous respect and admiration for President Obama and his national security team. If you think that that Biden just took that phone call and that was the end of it, no. Vice President Biden then called President Obama personally. This is the vice president. They thought this was such a big deal that Biden calls Obama to tell him about the apology call, which apparently spun Obama up enough to request a copy of the Rolling Stone profile, which had not even been published yet. This is before it had been. It was not even publicly known that this was going down. He then issues a summons to General Stanley McChrystal to come to the White House personally, pulling him away from his command on the other side of the planet to stand before him and answer for a profile in which he made no critical comments and had not even hit the report hadn't even hit the newsstand yet. So McChrystal met with Obama. It was on June 23rd, 2010. This was 2 days before the article was released to the newsstand, but it had already appeared the day before online. At that meeting, McChrystal's resignation was accepted by President Obama and thereafter nominated General David Petraeus to relieve Stanley McChrystal of his command. Now, after his removal, again, where he made no infraction against military rules, broke no law, made no personal act or statement against his commander-in-chief, he was made to resign his command, and then he retired. Compare that to just what former Secretary Spencer has already admitted to in his Washington Post op-ed. So far, he's admitted to twice pushing back his words, my words would be insubordination, on what he does not dispute was a lawful order by President Trump. Keep that in mind. He's not saying that the order was not in accordance with the law. His dispute was on the wisdom of the order. By Obama's own standard of what he did with McChrystal, he should have been gone right then and there. So I don't know why Trump even tolerated that. It gets worse, people. So after President Trump pardoned Gallagher of the one little thing that he got tagged with, the photo, the Navy, under the auspices of former Secretary Gallagher, it seems, was trying to still defy the Commander-in-Chief and consider demanding Gallagher's forced retirement, whether he should be allowed to retain his rank at retirement, should he be honorably discharged, and would he be allowed to keep his trident, his SEAL trident that marked him as a member of the elite SEALs. So in an act that I don't think I've ever heard of before, which I have no idea how he thought he was going to get away with this, having been overruled twice already on punishing Gallagher, Spencer writes President Trump a letter on November 14th requesting that he not get involved in the further disposition of Gallagher's case. A third, and this time now documented instance of rank insubordination in a letter. In effect, he was trying to hide, by getting Trump to not pay attention to it anymore, he was trying to hide from the president his determination to have the Navy punish Gallagher in direct contravention of the president's order that this case was over. White House counsel Pat Cipollone, he called Spencer 2 times. Now, I don't know why it was even 2 times. That's a phone call you shouldn't even have to make, period. But if you do have to make that phone call, that's a phone call you make 1 time. White House counsel Cipollone informed the former secretary on those 2 phone calls that as Commander-in-Chief, President Trump would continue to be involved in whatever matter he wanted to be involved with, and advised him to expect a formal, explicit order to restore Gallagher to the rank of Chief Petty Officer. Now, Spencer, he goes on to say how this was a shocking and unprecedented intervention in a low-level matter, yada, yada, yada. It's always shocking and unprecedented with these deep staters, you see, even if it isn't. I just described to you how General McChrystal got personally summoned onto the carpet of the Oval Office from the other side of the planet. He had to get on a plane and fly around the world to get canned for the quotes of low-level staffers about Obama in a Rolling Stone puff piece. And this guy doesn't seem to understand that for whatever reason, he thinks Gallagher should or should not be exposed to further administrative discipline. It's irrelevant. He does not dispute that the president can do this thing. He keeps debating whether or not the president should do this thing. When you work in the executive branch and you receive an order, the only question applicable is, can the president do it? If the answer is yes, he can, then you must follow it. End of story, whether you think it's a good idea or not. The chain of command has an elected civilian at the top for a reason. He's the one subject to the will of the people every 4 years and has the mandate of having been put there by the people. The founders wanted it that way to prevent petty unelected tyrants being made out of these bureaucrats, who believe that somehow they answer to no one. Listen to what Spencer wrote, as if this makes any difference. Given my desire to resolve a festering issue, I tried to find a way that would prevent the president from further involvement while trying all avenues to get Gallagher's file in front of a peer review board. Who does this guy think he is? This is how the deep staters think, that their judgment supersedes the president's. It doesn't work that way. It can't work that way, whether you're talking about the executive branch of the U.S. government or a mom-and-pop business. Spencer bizarrely admits to one mistake when he writes, I also began to work without personally consulting Defense Secretary Mark Esper on every step. That was, I see in retrospect, a mistake for which I am solely responsible. Yes, Spencer, because what you did every time you did the things described in your own op-ed is make an end run around your superior in the chain of command. He kept cutting his own boss out of the loop every time he went straight to the White House behind his back with all these cockamamie plans. This nutjob on November 19th just out and out tells White House staff about his plan to undermine Trump's involvement by shifting Gallagher's case to that independent review board. I mean, the balls on this guy. Where did he think he had this kind of latitude? November 21st, Trump slams the door on Gallagher's quixotic quest with the following tweet. The Navy will not be taking away warfighter and Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher's trident pin. This case was handled very badly from the beginning. Get back to business. So even through all this, Spencer still wasn't done. I don't know how much clearer it could be made, the president's intent on this. He'd been shot down already 3 times. The tweet on the 21st couldn't make things any clearer. He already had his order in hand. It had been confirmed to him 3 times that this was the way it was going to be. He writes, I recognize that the tweet revealed the president's intent, but I did not believe it to be an official order, chiefly because every action taken by the president in the case so far had either been a verbal or written command. So after all that, this guy was still trying to defy the order by waiting for a written document saying, hey, for the 4th time already, leave Gallagher alone. It was at that point that Secretary Mark Esper pulled the plug on Spencer and said, I want your letter of resignation. You see, Esper, unlike President Trump, once he realized his subordinate was engaging in an act of insubordination against him personally, he only needed the one time to tell the president he'd lost confidence in Spencer as his subordinate and intended to demand his resignation. That's how it's supposed to work. Once this guy, Esper, found out this guy was going behind his back and undermining the order, he's like, no, you're done. What Trump should have done a week and a half ago, the first time this guy undermined his orders. I can't think of an example of such public, persistent, and flagrant disobeying of a direct order of the President of the United States than this example. I mean, for this guy to either not realize he was being insubordinate, but somehow to acknowledge he was being insubordinate to his direct superior when he went around him, Esper, in the chain of command, it's cognitive dissonance. His superior, Esper, derives his authority from the president. How can he somehow be insubordinate to the defense secretary, but not see how that's also insubordinate to the president from whom the defense secretary receives his authority? on whose orders he's acting. And to put the icing on the cake, go out and write an op-ed in the Washington Post to all but reveal, his perfidious acts to everyone. I'm telling you, these deep staters, they view themselves as heroes, even when they admit their wrongdoing. Somehow, because they're defying the bad orange man, they think this somehow absolves them of wrongdoing. This is how you got the Mueller investigation. This is how you got the Sally Yates thing at the beginning of the administration. It's almost to the point where you have to consider giving these people some kind of orientation training when they get these jobs to teach them that they have no independent authority and that they cannot ignore or thwart the lawful orders that come down their chains of command. It's that simple. That's all for this NeoUnrealist. If you want to help the channel, do me a favor, hit like for this video, leave a comment below, or mash down on the subscribe button if you're not already subbed to the channel. You got to click on that notification bell beside it. Otherwise, if you don't put it on the all setting, you won't be keeping up with newer content. If you want to contribute directly to the channel and toss your hard-earned dollars into the tip jar, you can follow the links below to Patreon, Subscribestar, or PayPal. But if you watch this on BitChute, you can just click on the green tip pledge button on the video player. Most importantly, though, thanks for watching.
That's bullshit! Get the f*** off the phone! Get the f*** off the phone!